Welcome to yet another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and welcome to this week's episode. I kind of want to call this the last episode of the year, and as we're getting closer to change freeze period, most companies would have their own change freeze period. I want to circle back to some of the things that we've already covered in some of the past episode. Normally, a change freeze happens during the time between holiday seasons in North America, especially the United States. Normally, it starts between Thanksgiving weekend, so that factors into a Black Friday, Cyber Monday, up until like the New Year. And some retailers would take this opportunity to offer more sales to get you to buy more stuff. But for others, that could mean the start of the week of Christmas. So that's 23, 24, up until like 2nd of January. Taking into account a lot of people are actually going on either vacation, they're looking at options for they call them skeleton crew, where not a lot of people are in the office. Therefore, they could minimize some of the activities that they could do during the holiday seasons. Now, every once in a while, I would kind of ask my customers, okay? And still, we're in this theme throughout the month called change freeze. And like I mentioned, every once in a while, I kind of ask questions to my customers that would challenge the status quo. I use the story because, again, change freeze normally starts between United States Thanksgiving until the New Year. Typically, I would ask somehow challenging questions, much like how I used to use the story of the Thanksgiving turkey. Story goes when a family started preparing, a young girl started asking her mom about Thanksgiving and the turkey tradition. I have no clue about that. I did not grow up with Thanksgiving. We just embraced it when we moved to North America. But there was this kid asking her mom, "Hey mom, why do you cut the legs of the turkey before you put it in the oven?" And her mom said, "Well, your Nana, her grandmother, your Nana taught me how to do it. She's in the room. Why don't you go and ask her?" She went to her Nana, asked the same question. "Hey Nana, why did you teach my mom to cut the legs of the turkey before you even put it in the oven?" And her Nana responded, "Well, your granny, which was her great-grandmother, is in the other room. Why don't you go ahead and ask her, because I learned it from her." Walked to the other room to her granny, asked her granny, "Hey granny, I asked my mom, I asked Nana. They told me that it came from you. Why do you cut the legs of your turkey before you put it in the oven?" The response was pretty simple. "Well, we didn't have a big enough oven back then." And so the story emphasizes a lot about how sometimes we simply do things for the sake of doing things. And because it's part of either tradition, it's embedded in the company culture, people will do things that they've been doing throughout the years without even questioning why they're doing what they're doing. I remember one of my customers from way back, big telecom companies in Europe. They were doing ETL and data processing every day for their large data warehouse so that they can get their reports ready come 8 o'clock in the morning for the executives to look at. The data warehouse has become so big that the ETL process, the data processing task, has taken more than 24 hours. More than 24 hours, to a point where they cannot even get the reports ready before the morning's executive meeting. And the first question, and the only question I asked that got them to really think about, so why do you need to process all of that data? Crickets. Silence. Because we have gotten used to the fact that maybe because it's how we've done it before, and so we just have to keep doing it. Hence, I like asking that question. I like asking questions that challenge the status quo. Not to insult the person, but just out of curiosity. And trying to understand why they did what they did, because maybe it is no longer relevant. Okay, I remember a lot of the improvements from the SQL Server versions from 2012, 2014, 2016, 17, 19, and up until 2025, when Microsoft introduced the concept of operational analytics, where you're combining operations, OLTP with analytics, which potentially could remove the idea behind ELT or ETL or any type of data movement and data processing. But almost 10 years later, customers are, after introducing those features, customers are still doing a ton of ETL, to a point where we've created an entire career, an entire job description just to do ETL. And I know I'm getting off tangent here, but part of that is really just challenging why you are doing what you are doing. Going back to this topic, we're still on this month's theme called change freeze, and probably ask the question, what if, right? What if there is, or what if there was no change freeze? Now, for some large organizations, this is kind of scary and even rattling to some people who have already reached the top. Say, for instance, if you happen to join a company, first job out of university, and then 30 years later you're still with the same company, and you've seen the evolution of how things are done, and you rose throughout the ranks. You started as a junior staff, and now you're the CTO or CIO, and then asking questions like, what if there was no change freeze? And you've seen it all throughout your lifetime in a company. You kind of push back on the idea that maybe we shouldn't be challenging this, or maybe it's about time to reevaluate whether or not it's still applicable. Okay? If we go back to the idea behind change freeze, it's really all about making the system, the infrastructure, the application, the database, everything, right? It's not just one versus the other, but making the entire thing, especially the system that your business rely on, making it as stable, as reliable, and with high availability, as highly available and as resilient as you possibly can during, in some cases, the busiest time of the year. Like, especially when you're in retail where so many transactions are happening. So we want to keep things stable. But if we really do think about it, what's the point of keeping stuff stable? What's the goal of keeping the entire infrastructure, the entire system, the entire stack stable? And that is to minimize risk. So we've taken a practice like change freeze with the goal of keeping something, again, your infrastructure, your app, your database, your entire stack, stable during this time of the year, but without stepping or without asking beyond what the goal was. We're stuck with just keeping everything as they are, okay? And then, like I said, asking beyond that, which is, okay, what's the goal? If the goal is to minimize risk, and this is one thing that I do as well with my customers, is whether or not they're implementing a new high availability solution, they're implementing a new change, my definition has always gone back to, we want to minimize risk. Okay, so what if there was no change freeze, but we still meet the goal of minimizing risk as we are experiencing a ton of workload in our infrastructure? Again, whether you're big company with big infrastructures like hundreds and thousands of servers that you need to manage day to day, or small and medium-sized organizations where you manage about dozens to 100 servers and databases, the goal is still the same. It's not change freeze. The goal is to minimize risk. So what if we think of different approaches to minimize those risks? What are they? Let's start with the first one. We can do what I refer to as risk-based changes. You classify changes by risk. Okay? An example of this is, as you're deploying a new feature you need to make modifications to your database. Part of the modifications could be schema changes. Can that be reversible? Yes, you can. You can take a backup before you implement the change and then roll back in case something goes wrong. Of course, part of that is also testing before you even roll it out to production. Okay, SQL Server has features called Database Snapshot that would allow you to minimize the downtime needed for you to revert back changes, although you would have to risk your high availability in that case, because you would have to roll everything back, reset or break the log sequence chain, which will definitely require you removing the database from the availability group. But again, that is how you classify changes according to risks. Because the goal is not change freeze. The goal is not to sit there, do nothing, because you also still want to be productive. You want to roll out these changes, especially if those changes to your application will help improve operations during the busiest time of the year. Okay, so again, first thing is risk-based changes, classifying your changes by risk. Is it reversible? Is it irreversible? Like applying a patch. Now, if it, again, also understanding if it is an emergency change, which has to really go through regardless, but make sure you're testing it properly, right? You can reevaluate the change as well, because this is an opportunity for you to also reevaluate the way you do change management processes. It's also an opportunity for you to reevaluate how you actually deploy code in production, make changes to production, make modifications to systems and all. Understanding what those risks are. Okay, that's why I'm huge on having change management process and incorporating newer technologies, newer practices, but still keeping the same goal. Okay, the goal is not change freeze. The goal is to minimize risk while we're still in operations, doing our day-to-day operations. So again, whether that's database change or infrastructure change, classify those changes according to risks. The second one, of course, not a blanket freeze. Okay, let's not do anything. Let's not make modifications. The second one is continuous readiness validation. Okay, continuous readiness validation. When you're looking at continuous readiness validation, you're always looking for running health checks, for instance, improving your monitoring, implementing your streamlined observability with the goal of proactive management. Okay, the idea behind change freeze is, again, we're not going to change anything, but that doesn't mean that your system stops. It will still keep going, right? But with continuous readiness validation, before you even hit your change freeze period, you start looking at proactively validating your entire infrastructure, top to bottom. And most of the time, we only do this when there's a maintenance window, like checking everything. So what if you improve your readiness validation, chunk it down into small pieces instead of running everything all at the same time? I kind of liken this to when you're doing DBCC CheckDB for very large databases. In SQL Server, you have this concept of running integrity checks where you're running everything for your entire database. Manageable if you have like 500 to 1 terabyte size database, which you can do in less than a couple of minutes given the compute storage resources that you have. What if your database has grown to like petabyte size, 25, 40 petabytes, 100 petabytes? You can't do a CheckDB in one shot and expect it to finish. What you do is you chunk it down, right? You chunk it down to smaller chunks. Maybe do a check table of the smallest tables first, and then schedule and stagger to do a check table of the next set of tables, and so on and so forth. Maybe you're excluding other checks and only doing physical only integrity checks. So that's how I kind of liken the continuous readiness validation. You're looking for ways on how to be proactive with this. And with all the information that you're getting from your monitoring tool, from other data sources. Again, depending on how big your organization is, you might have different monitoring tools for your databases, your operating system, your networking, and then you need some form of a single pane of glass for everything if you're managing large infrastructures, and identifying like potential trends. Okay, like for instance, again, your health checks. Normally, they would run for X amount of time, hours maybe. Chunk it down, look at the trend, and tweak. Okay, what you're doing here is you're not just monitoring and not just validating your infrastructure. You're also streamlining and improving how you do stuff. Okay. Again, as the infrastructure that you're managing grows, your operational approach should also evolve with it. Okay, so again, whether it's for your high availability systems, for your infrastructure, for your application, everything else, you have to do the readiness validation. Okay, not just a one-time thing where, hey, we need to do an audit, we need to do a health check. That you got to do it continuously. And if you can't really do it in one shot without requesting for maintenance window, you stagger it so that you can improve your operational process as part of this. The third one is also embracing DevOps principles alongside high availability solutions. We're not just looking for simply deploying code with implementation of DevOps principles, but think of how can we incorporate DevOps principles within our high availability solutions. Sure, the developers are already doing it. How can we implement that with high availability solutions? Stuff like blue-green deployments, stuff like small changes, again, that can be rolled back immediately. Similar to the first point, minimal risks that you can apply immediately without having too much of a disruption, without causing too much of an issue to the system. But again, understanding this and looking at the other three options, right? Like continuous readiness validation and risk-based change alongside with embracing DevOps principles. The idea behind this is really just challenging the notion of change freeze where nobody's allowed to do anything, but rather go back to the real reason why we want to do change freeze, and that is to minimize risk, not to not do anything. Okay, there's a big difference between not doing anything. Of course, not doing anything, you're not going to make any changes, and therefore you're also not going to be productive. In life in general, there will always be risks. But part of that is, again, re-evaluating every task, every process, the way you've done things in the past, and challenging the notion of maybe we don't need change freeze, or maybe we need to redefine what change freeze, or maybe it's about time to re-evaluate what we're doing. It's like the Thanksgiving turkey story. Re-evaluate what we've been doing all this while and see if it still makes sense to keep doing it. Now, the story that I got reminded of was a friend of mine who's a VMware expert, and they were working on same thing. It's an ETL thing. The customer has been doing ETL for years, and the company's been around for like 30 plus years. And the way they've done ETL is basically how it's defined: extract, transform, and load, to a point where the customer would grab all of the data from their existing data warehouse or the old TP databases, process, and then load it into a new data warehouse, to a point where it's taking up too much resource, it's taking up too much storage requirements, and it's also taking up too much time. And quite frankly, the friend of mine asked the same question: what if we don't have to do that ETL? And nobody ever bothered asking that question. What if we don't have to do the ETL? There was a long pause until the CTO mentioned, well, sounds like a good idea. That question triggered an avalanche of ideas to a point where the final idea that they eventually rolled out in production was this: take a snapshot of the storage, detach that snapshot, reattach it to new VM, and no more ETL. Okay, because that's exactly the data that they need. So all they did was they took a snapshot of the storage of the existing OLTP database, took a snapshot of the storage, detached that snapshot, reattach it to a new VM, and there goes their data. No extract, no transform, no load. It's just an exact copy of the database. At that point, of course, they realized, well, yeah, we can let go of the idea of doing ETL and just do this. Of course, there are trade-offs. Like in this case, the trade-off is, yeah, we need an extra storage, extra space, extra compute. Sure, but that's where re-evaluating your existing processes and calculating the cost and the risk associated with this, because part of the, in the long run, what they did was they've calculated the amount of time, compute resources that they were doing for the ETL every day, to a point where in 3 months they were able to recover the cost of the extra storage space, the extra compute that they've invested into this infrastructure, so that they no longer have to do the ETL. Okay, so again, part of just re-evaluating what you have been doing for the past couple of years within your organization, and this is something that you have to do on a regular basis. Look at the task, see if the task is still meeting what it's supposed to be, the goal that it's supposed to meet, and if yes, maybe it's time to reevaluate. If not, get rid of it. Maybe you don't need to implement that task, or maybe you don't need to do that task at all. Okay, that is about it for this week's episode of Practical SQL Server HA, our show, and again, the last episode of the year. And hopefully, you'll have an amazing holiday celebration as you end the year. If you encounter, hopefully not, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, I appreciate if you can put them and write them on the comment section. The topics that I have been covering throughout the episodes ever since I started this were all from feedback, comments, suggestions, and of course some of the questions that I've been getting either through email, social media, and sometimes people just commenting on the videos. And if you need any help with anything high availability and disaster recovery, specifically with SQL Server and your data platform solutions, reach out. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and happy to help in any way I can. This link will direct you to my calendar page, although within the next couple of days, the calendar page will be empty. Yes, I try to keep it that way. During the holiday seasons, I try not to work. Try is the word. But again, after the holidays, reach out, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's have a conversation. And if I can help in any way I can, I will. If not, I will steer you in a direction that will help serve you best. Again, enjoy the rest of your... Depends. It really depends. Depends on which part of the world you are. In some parts of the world, they're all on vacation at this time of the year. Some parts of the world, they are working through Christmas and New Year. So however you spend and celebrate your holiday, enjoy your celebrations. Enjoy your weekends, your holidays with your family and friends. And I'll see you in the next episode of Practical SQL Server HA, our show.